I don't really attach labels to myself, whether it's photographer, artist, or whatever. My work is obviously clearly research-based, and I work very closely with journalists, academics working in these fields. I think art, if it's going to survive, if it's going to have a lifespan, if it's going to engage people, has to leave them space to ask their own questions and find their own answers. So yes, clearly I'm interested in a certain type of subject. I'm interested in what that says about the societies that we live in. But in terms of what I do, the forms that I'm exploring are also interesting to me. So I don't set out to make work that is activist. I don't set out to make work that bangs you on the head and says this is what you're supposed to think, because these are complicated, difficult issues. I try to make work which interests and engages and reflects on those issues, but gives people the space to think and maybe think differently. My first book, Still Life Killing Time, was looking at a prison environment. It was while I was working in there that 9/11 happened, the war on terror started, and suddenly while working in a prison, I'm seeing another place of incarceration, Guantanamo Bay, appearing on my screen as a global spectacle. So in a sense there was a logical progression from working in one prison to then trying to address that issue, which was at a much wider scale. Once I'd started that, then obviously when I researched and found out about the CIA secret prison program, that again was a logical progression, looking at the detention and control of terrorism suspects in the United Kingdom and the law changes that were involved there was also kind of a logical step. So in a sense, these subjects, these experiences have unfolded in front of me. The images I made in Guantanamo Bay, there are three types of image. There are images from the naval base where the American community live. There are images in the homes where people who have been held there and are now released are living back in the United Kingdom or in the Middle East. And there's images from the detention camps at Guantanamo. That's a way of kind of putting those images together and then sequencing them to explore an idea, which is one of disorientation. The images themselves are very much dictated by what I can do, what I can see in the space. So at Guantanamo, I knew I didn't want to take photographs which had people in them. I didn't want to take photographs which kind of perpetuated the news imagery I was seeing, which was speaking to dehumanization and demonization. So I wanted to photograph space and objects. I'm very aware of how the subjects I'm working with have been seen and represented. I'm trying to make work which does think differently, but also which is unexpected to the viewer. So a picture of a bedroom with a rose-covered pillowcase, if you're told this is about Guantanamo Bay, that's not what you're going to expect based on what you've seen before. In other situations, I'm seeing things which no one has seen before. I'm trying to photograph or trying to explore situations and issues which you can't see. You can't see inside a CIA secret prison, but you can try and understand the network which leads up to someone being delivered there. You can try and picture different points on that network to kind of show how that process is being controlled and who's running it. At Guantanamo, you're not allowed to take pictures which identify people. So that's one of the forms of censorship straight away. With people who had been in Guantanamo and then released, some of them were prepared to be photographed, but then again at that stage the image of the South Asian Arab male with a beard was so toxic that you take a photograph of someone like that, particularly in relation to a subject like Guantanamo, and the level of analysis you're going to get from most people is, oh, it's a terrorist. Because you have to be aware of the kind of preconceptions and the kind of beliefs which are embedded in those forms of representation. I'm very interested in documents and bureaucracy. Often the paperwork that is handed to an individual who is in a form of detention represents the crystallization of the controlling power over them. The language, the way in which it's typed, the way in which it is copied, the way in which it's presented, speaks volumes. It's also another way of bringing these subjects down to the mundane, because a lot of this paperwork is very ordinary, but also visually very interesting. I mean, part of the Guantanamo work is a series called Letters to Omar, which are documents, but they're also amazing images. Letters to Omar is a selection of mail sent to one detainee during 6 years at Guantanamo Bay. His case was kind of held up nationally and internationally as a symbol of the man at Guantanamo. So he received thousands of pieces of material. He was at the highest level of non-compliance, so every aspect of his life was controlled by his interrogator at Guantanamo, including when and if and in what form he received any mail. So everything went through a process of scanning and redacting and archiving and stamping. So he never received anything original. So they're fascinating as historical documents, but they're also images created by Guantanamo Bay, which have then been used in the control process exercised over the individual. And because of the nature of some of the material, because he received so much of it, it actually, he confessed to me, added to his sense of disorientation and paranoia. Disorientation was the kind of the purpose of being held at Guantanamo. It wasn't just a place to hold people, it was a place to interrogate people. And that interrogation was based on the behaviour management plan, which was about fostering a sense of disorientation and dependence and paranoia in the mind of the people who were being detained and interrogated. So the visual narrative tries to evoke that. It becomes disjointed. It is disjointed, it's dissonant. You don't know what you're looking at. But you make your own connections, I hope, whether it's through form, colour, what you think you're looking at. Eventually you find out at the back of the book. The artefacts are both the documents and the photographs in Negative Publicity, artefacts of extraordinary rendition. They represent the research process of my collaborator, Crofton Black, counter-terrorism investigator, and the work he did putting together a paper trail of the process, the networks of extraordinary rendition, and then the photographs which are a response to that documentation. There are international standards which governments sign up to where they say they won't disappear people, but at one level that's exactly what did happen. People were picked up, they did disappear, and they were transported to secret sites to be interrogated without people knowing they were there. It involves keeping people awake for days and days and days, holding them in stress positions. It's psychology, and a lot of it is sensory disorientation, keeping people in confined spaces, moving them around, not giving them any sense of where they are. One of the things we tried to do with Negative Publicity was to represent different ways in which the subject had been examined and spoken about by other people as well. So you have redacted internal CIA reports, you have a New York law school report, you have company invoices, emails, billing reconciliations. You have all sorts of different documents which come from a number of different sources. One of the key elements of the documentation is the redaction, the obfuscation, and particularly the black rectangle, which appears again and again, the strikeout. So when I did eventually, just out of interest, go to Lithuania to visit the former CIA black site in the tiny village outside the capital of Lithuania, and started to make large format imagery there, I started to realise over time that there was a point to photographs which in a sense were a response to the strikeout, the black rectangle, which through the very fact they couldn't show anything in particular, resonated with that idea on the one hand of secrecy, obfuscation, things being hidden, but at the same time, because these were very ordinary places, went directly to represent the fact that this was a process that was run by small companies. It wasn't run by a secret government agency. It was outsourced to people who rent aeroplanes, who organise flight schedules. The locations where these forms of interrogation took place were often in very ordinary, quiet suburbs or small villages. There's something very ordinary about what happened here. There is a sense of a network of mundanity that is kind of charged by the relationship between a piece of paper, an invoice, an aeroplane, a small airfield. A lot of my work has been about unseen experiences and sights, but also unseen processes. And I think it's the unseen processes that are now the key element of what happens in contemporary conflict. Those processes are of intelligence gathering and decision making and carrying out of airstrikes or raids. That's a network of process which happens across the world, which we don't see, which there is no real accountability for. The other way in which that process is unseen is that this is now taking place on newly formed battle spaces by legal justifications for intervention and acts in countries that no one is actually at war with. The other way in which it is unseen is that because we are not actually at war with these countries and because we do not have boots on the ground, we do not have body bags coming back, we do not have a media there interested in what is happening. So we don't see what's going on. We don't see, really, the consequences of Allied airstrikes in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Somalia. We don't see those. It's off our media radar. We are all, to a certain extent, complicit by what's been done in our names, but people at different points in that network maybe knew what was going on. Those were people going about their everyday business. That's your next door neighbour going about their job. Your next door neighbour might have known that their job involved the extrajudicial detention, transportation and interrogation of an individual by your government. Now, if you know that and you stop and you think about the implications of that, some people might go, I don't care, they deserve what they're getting. But actually, we live in countries that say we are the beacons of the free world, we believe in justice and honesty. Control Order House is a body of work about a form of effectively detention without trial, introduced in 2005 in the United Kingdom, whereby someone who was suspected of involvement with some form of terrorist-related activity was not prosecuted, was not arrested and prosecuted and given a trial. They were told that they had to agree to live under a control order, which involved a number of ways in which their lives would be controlled, one of which was that they would be removed from where their home was to live in a different town, to be kind of taken out of their environment. Every aspect of their life would then be controlled. They would be tagged, electronically tagged, living under a curfew, had to move only within a certain area around where they lived, could only have a government phone, no internet, no passport, only a certain amount of money, couldn't, in this man's instance, meet more than 2 people in the street. All sorts of different forms of control were applied to them. But the grounds on which the suspicion was based, the evidence on which the suspicion was based, was not shown to them. So it remained secret. It's a bit like Kafka's trial. It took about 2 years to find a solicitor who represented someone under a control order who was prepared to work with me. I went and stayed with him. I came away with a body of material, one of the parts of which was I had photographed every inch, every centimetre of every room. I was asked to exhibit the work, and as part of the process of that, I started to realise that that material, how it had been photographed, the mistakes, the changes of lenses, but the fact that as a totality it showed the whole of this interior, spoke about the relationship between how to make photographs and show photographs and issues of order and control. So I reproduce all the photographs in the order in which I take them with just the JPEG number as the title. They are narrative because you can follow my eye as I go around a room and you go through the house. You actually go through the house twice, all the way through. That has elements of kind of ideas of the panopticon. It also has elements of surveillance. The access I was given was dependent on my work must not identify him or identify the house. And anyone who knew him or knew the house must not be able to make a connection through my work to the fact it's where someone is held on a control order, which conceptually is virtually impossible. So as part of the work, I did photograph surfaces, and I photographed these classic British wallpapers, textured wallpapers, which they are archetypal surfaces you find in a certain type of house that's often rented out. And they are topographical because you come up so close, you see the blisters of the paint, you see the tiny scratches on the wallpaper, but they're also about order and control, because some of these are incredibly regular patterns and others are very kind of strange, wild swirls and disordered. It's like a crime scene, it's a picture of a battlefield in some ways. One thing I think which has driven my work all the way through is a deep interest in the form that I use, whether that's the way I photograph, the way I make images, the way I use images, the way I put installations together in museums and galleries, the way I make books, what those books do as objects, which speak as much through their form of the subjects as they do through their content. You know, I have, because of the nature of the subjects I look at, had to try and find new ways of seeing, new ways of communicating. That is something I find deeply fascinating. Sometimes I think perhaps my work is seen very much in terms of, you know, the documentary tradition or kind of the social, political subjects I'm working on, but the forms which I use and the way in which I try to communicate is really important to me. I hope what I try to do is to use new visual strategies to communicate these ideas and these subjects in a way which people haven't seen before. I think that's important to me.